where supply chains for manufacturing break down on a global basis, the need for the difficult to get parts, I'm thinking transmissions here, for example, for automotive, is going to skyrocket. And Germany's skill set is much more appropriate to that role than the kind of the mass manufacturing capacity that we've become used to in the past. Germany redesigned its political and its economic model around the realities of globalization in order to take the most advantage of it. France never did. And that's one of the reasons why the French are having all these protests over pensions, because trying to get this into what we might consider a more viable economic model under the globalized rubric has never been something they were interested in. This is what most of the world looked like before the industrialization wave that occurred after World War II. But with globalization, this all changed, because it used to be that we all lived on farms and you would have as many kids as you could put up with because they were free labor. Well, as many kids as you could put up with plus one, because that's how you find out it's too many kids. But when you take an industrial job, which international trade made possible, those were all in the cities. And as you move off the farm and into the cities, you have fewer of them because kids go from being a free source of labor to a massive expense and headache. And over the ages, the Korean demographic has shifted to this. The whole world has gone with the Koreans, starting from different points, going at different paces, but this has changed the economic structure of the world, because when you're a young system like this, it's all about raising kids and buying homes and buying cars and going to college. Young people do all of the spending in a modern economic system. That tends to make it very inflationary. But an older system like this, it's all about the high value-added workers who are doing everything they can to save for retirement. They've got decades of work experience, their incomes are high, their kids have moved out, so their expenses are low, and they're generating a lot of spare capital for whatever they need. What is going on right now is the world is changing from this to whatever is next. This was always the decade when a huge chunk of the world's advanced economies were going to age from this structure like Korea's today into the next structure, which is one where we have more and more retired people, where that bulge that has defined economic existence going back to the 50s moves into a non-economically viable state. So if a young demography is inflation-driven and growth-driven, and a more mature state like Korea today is investment-driven, technology-driven, infrastructure-driven, then whatever's next can't have consumption or production or capital, because retirees are sitting on their capital in the form of T-bills and cash. They're no longer working, so there's no consumption and there's no production. We all make that shift at different times, but for most of the advanced world, this is the decade it all goes down. Start with the United States. We've got the healthiest demographic structure in the world. That doesn't mean it's perfect. You can see the bulge of the baby boomers in their 60s, so we're going through the same aging process as everyone else, and digesting the boomers is going to be painful. But we also have the millennials down below, who are rounding out the labor force in a way that is allowing us to have a more inflation-driven system as opposed to deflation. That big gap in the roughly 5 to 10-year-olds, that is a mix of two things, or three things. Number one, that's the Gen Xers' kids. Small generation generates a small generation. Number two, it's the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. When people aren't sure of their prospects, they tend to have fewer kids. And third, it's the millennials doing everything that everyone has ever done before them, just with a 6-year delay. And so that was kind of the bottoming out of the birth rate. You'll notice it's already coming back, and preliminary data for 2022 and 2023 looks very positive. So we are looking at that base widening out again. But these shifts, these ins and outs of the demographic structures, they're actually going to be the single biggest factor that is shaping the labor force, our capital markets, and our economic structure for the next 50 years. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, because that's how it's been so far. The same holds true in Japan on the whole demographics shape destiny. But here, it's just that the birth rate has been so low for so long, they're well past the point of any sort of demographic regeneration. About all I can say that's positive for Japan is they've seen this coming and they've done some planning. Automation in life, not in manufacturing, in life, is more advanced in Japan than it is in any other places. They have robotic nurses, they've got hospital beds that turn patients. A lot of the stuff that doesn't require a lot of brains, but doesn't necessarily require eyes and hands, has been automated, and that's allowed Japan to age relatively gracefully. In addition, the Japanese, while they can't accept migrants because they have such a firm sense of culture, they have been able to expand spending on things like childcare and healthcare to encourage young families to have more children. It's met with some success. And so Japan, while it is still the oldest demographic structure on Earth today, it's no longer the most rapidly aging. It's still in the top 10, don't get carried away. But Thailand, Korea, China, and Germany and Italy are all aging faster, which brings us to Germany. This was always going to be Germany's last decade as an industrial power. They're aging too fast. They missed the point to turn the demographic ship of state 40 years ago. And they just haven't had much luck with immigration. In the 90s, they were able to bring in roughly 1 million people from the former Yugoslavia. That helped. And then about 10 years ago, they brought in about 1 million people from Syria. The problem with the Syrian refugees, once you move past the cultural disconnect, is that these people were unskilled labor and they were 85% male. They didn't bring their families with them. And so it's a shot in the arm, yes, but it's no assistance for long-term demographic regeneration. There is a hope, perhaps, that they'll be able to pick up about 1 million Ukrainian refugees who are relatively highly skilled. It would be easier carry to culturally integrate them. But at this point, the demographic decline is so far advanced that by 2030, the Germans will no longer have the workforce that's necessary to do the things that we associate with Germany. And that assumes nothing else goes wrong. Nothing with Euro, nothing with relations with the United States trade, nothing with the Russians, and all of that is going. And then finally, we get the People's Republic of China. Now, this is already one of the fastest aging workforces in history ever. It's actually faster than the collapse of the workforces during the Black Death, during the Middle Ages in Europe. We also know that this is not the correct data. Only about 2-3 weeks ago, the Chinese released updated data that has since been incorporated into this graphic, showing that the birth rate has just collapsed. Since 2017, between 2017 and 2021, the birth rate dropped by 40%. And that's before you consider the anecdotals we have out of China, what went down with COVID crash, suggesting that it's fallen even further. So we're already in a situation where we have children 5 and under as we have children aged 10 to 15, which is well past terminal. It's already past terminal, but this is, you're looking at ethnic dissolution here with this sort of trend. And that assumes this data is accurate. The Shanghai Academy of Sciences is publicly trying to stir up discussion about how, because of the one-child policy, people have been over-reporting births and under-reporting different statistics, especially when it comes to labor, in order to make the local provinces look better. And they estimate that the Chinese system actually has 100 million fewer children than the data officially suggests. That probably means that that big gouge in the lower chunk actually plays up higher within the demographic structure, and those yellow bars probably don't exist at all. This is not a country in demographic decay. This is a country in the advanced stages of demographic collapse. And we don't have an economic theory as a species for what might make this work. It's obvious from the data that the Chinese have shared that consumption-led growth will never happen again. They actually saw a collapse in things like car sales back before COVID. They've never rebounded.